All right, I'm going to do another quick episode. No, I'm not. It's not put back together yet. I think my last video was the one where I verified we had oil up to the top. That was right before the holidays. I ended up going to see family for the holidays, and I ended up getting COVID, so I haven't been able to do a whole lot, but I have done at least quite a bit in my eyes, especially considering I've had COVID all week. But I had a few days where I have done some stuff. So I have put the fuel rails back in. I did clean the injectors. Those are torqued down. I'm doing a little bit of kind of trying to tidy up the wiring a little. I really just didn't like the way it was kind of ran back there, so I've kind of redone that, and I've redone how the connectors for the fuel rails connect. So working on that now. I have the new valve cover. That's the 2019 Plus that has the PCV built in. So I'll be running that. It fits. The valve covers are not fully installed at the moment. I want to get this thing... I found out I'm going to have to get this thing basically fully, everything fully reinstalled before I can start it. The main reason is I had to remove a cooler line for the transmission to get the fan out. And because of that, if I start it, I'm going to blow trans fluid everywhere. So rather than deal with that, I'm just going to put everything back together before I go ahead and start it. I have cranked it, and it does do the oiling up the push rods, but my intent is to do everything to where it can run. I'm going to temporarily install the valve covers, and then once I get everything put back together, I'm going to start it and run it and just, verify the oiling up the push rods before I torque down the valve covers, and then we'll be good to go. I do intend to do that before I reinstall the front suspension and the front diff. You guys remember I had the vibration issue. I've still got to mess with that. Yes, I know this is all a mess, but I should say an organized, messy person. As in, I'm pretty messy, but it has an organization to me. I know where everything is. I know where all my bolts are. It's just the way I work. I do that with my hobbies and in my actual profession. But I wanted to kind of go over a few things. So I do have the driver's or the passenger side manifold installed. I have not installed the driver's side. I'm going to try to install it a different way. And I have to pull the dipstick and a couple other things to get that one in. But that's kind of where I've left off. But I kind of wanted to go and show a few things while I still have kind of stuff dismantled. A couple questions that have come up. Most of them occur down underneath. So let's get some light. One question that's come up is pertaining to engine mounts. So I kind of wanted to show these are the current performance engine mounts, and I had a couple questions as far as where they are at in relation to the slots. So this is the driver's side, and as you can see, I'm pretty much all the way to where this motor mount is slid towards the back. That's where I had to be to get the trans to align to the mount. Those that remember, that trans mount is actually the Colorado one, and I had to drill out the mount where it goes into the transmission. So that mount has been drilled a tad bit bigger so that the Silverado transmission mount bolts could go through the Colorado mount, just to refresh people. So that is the Colorado trans mount. It does align with the 8090. You just have to drill out those holes a little bit bigger to accept the 8L90 bolts. I wanted to kind of show my oil filter setup. So those that remember in early videos, this cross member and the front diff sits right here. I had to run a remote oil filter, so I have this is the Flex Cool. I guess they call it a bypass. So that threads right on like an oil filter. It's a little shallower. It's a little dirty because I've spilled oil taking this thing apart. But this is maybe about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches tall. And then I have 2 AN lines, or 2 AN to NPT. I think that's National Pipe Thread. These are in my parts list, but those bolt in through the bottom. I did originally try a side mount, and it hits the diff. The diff sits up in here. The side mount AN adapter does not work. You have to do a downward facing. And so I have the adapter. I did have to buy some couplings to just drop it down. And then I have some 90s. I did try 45s, and it did not clear the pan. So this is how I had to clear the pan, to where I come straight across. And then I come, you couldn't see this previously, I think, because I had the diff in place. But you come across, I took some flat stock, and I've kind of bent it and made this bracket. I just have a bolt on the underside of this is the engine mount. This is the Colorado mount with the current adapter on it. So this is the 2 bolts, and then there's one over here. It's actually up in there. But what I did was I found a nut that fit on that, and then I put this flat stock with a hole in it, put it up, and then I have a clamp that basically holds this. You can't really see, but it's actually not really touching there. But I did put these hydraulic kind of hose protectors, and these are AN PTFE braided lines, so they're pretty protected if they do kind of rub. And then I have my transmission, which is not hooked up currently, but my transmission cooler lines are also on that bracket. So there's a clamp here, and then these are clamped together to kind of run along here and keep them kind of away from the engine and going into a nice straight pathway. Yeah, I don't have that hooked up currently. That's why I kind of have this bag of fluid there. But yeah, I kind of wanted to show that a little bit cleaner without the diff in the way, so you can kind of see how I ran that. And then it goes straight into my filter relocation bracket that I've got bolted to the frame. That was done with some riv nuts, and that's pretty out of the way. It is nice. It's protected by the skid. The skid does has that little turn up part here, so this is all protected. As you can see, it's pretty high up compared to the skid mount here. But that is protected by the skid. Let's see what else. Oh, these lines here are protected by the skid that goes from here to the cross member that's removed at the moment. But this sits a pretty good distance. I mean, you could see the steering is actually lower than that is. But that's kind of how I have it mounted with the oil pan that I'm running. Those that remember, so because of this oil pan having a sump way over here, this is actually, I mean, you can kind of see my hand. That sump extends out. I ran AN lines for the transcooler. They come across here, and then they go to my distribution block, or my 8L90 block with the thermostat in it that I got from Improved Racing. That's in an earlier video. But I did try to run some hard wires, but I had to cut them here, and they kept leaking, so I decided to run full AN. So that's kind of how I had to do that because of that, mainly because of this oil pan. If you run the Holley oil pan, which I know some people have messaged me and talked about running, so the Holley oil pan has to be cut and welded because of this clearance. I think that thing's like 9 inches. So it comes out to about here, and the diff sits. It's pretty much going to hit the diff, so you have to cut and weld it and basically almost shape it to look almost similar to this. But if you know how to weld, that would be cheaper. One of the things with that pan is that this is actually, because of the way the sump is right here, the filter location is actually pushed this way. And that causes it to come really close to the front diff, which is why I had to run this. So with the Holley pan, from my understanding, the oil filter is actually, there's a cutout, and the oil filter actually, I think it even is like right there. So you could run the factory oil filter location with that Holley pan and not have to do this. So with that, the trade-off is you're having to cut and weld the pan, but it's not, I don't really consider that bolt-on if you have to cut and weld the pan, but my intent was to try to do this as bolt-on as possible, which is why I went this route. This route you do not have the oil cooler fittings that typically come right here and go that way. So the Holley would allow you to run the kind of factory, we'll call it factory oil filter or oil cooler lines. You would have to adapt those somewhere and go into an oil cooler depending on how you have it mounted. I'm not using an oil cooler because this is my stock radiator. And if you remember, I had mud in my oil, so there's probably mud in this oil cooler, and I do not want to run it. But I have not had issues with the oil being super hot. I do change it every 3,000 miles. I've got about 8,000 miles on the build so far. So I've changed it multiple times, and it seems to be okay. Let's see what else. Oh, let's show the driver's side engine mount. You can see it is slightly not to the end, and that is just because the engine, when it sits straight and the way that plate is actually in a different location than the other plate based on how it mounts to the engine mount, it's not in the same location, but the engine is still straight. I've shown that in another video. It's straight in relation to the rear end. I've done some angle measurements and figured that out. Now during the week I did get everything. I did get the big stuff reinstalled. So the trans is back in the transfer case, which was not fun to do when you have COVID, but I got that in there. There's still wiring I've got to redo, clean that up a little, run that back and plug everything in. You can see the new bolt there. The torque converter is attached to the flex plate. I did install all new flex plate bolts because, as you remember, I did pull the flex plate to do the rear main. So I did all new bolts. They're all torqued, and then I did have to buy a new torque converter. I don't know if I even covered this, but when I first installed this, I had actually stripped one of these bolts, but I was able to get it tightened and torqued. So I left it, and I said, I hope I'll never have to pull this thing apart again. And guess what? I had to pull it apart again. So to not create too much of an issue, I ended up just buying another torque converter. I was going to have the trans out anyways to do the rear main. So bought all new bolts, new torque converter is in, and yeah, we'll just deal with that. A new torque converter is not necessarily a bad thing. As you remember, I've had to replace the valve body already, so might as well put a new torque converter in it as well. And maybe this thing will be shifting like butter after that. But yeah, I kind of wanted to show mainly the mounts and how they look in relation to how the engine is positioned in the engine bay. Cover a little bit of my cooler setup. I don't think this is I think the only thing that varies off of some of my original videos is I did originally have, because I had a new radiator, but I could not get fittings to basically tighten this cooler down to where the coolant did not leak out. So there's actually a seal on the inside of this where when these are tightened, it pulls the oil cooler tight and seals the coolant in here from coming out. And then there's another O-ring for this fitting that basically seals the oil. And on the used one is the, or I'm sorry, not the used one, but the new one is the one I was playing with fittings, and I had issues getting this to seal. So that's why I kind of abandoned the oil cooler idea. And I couldn't even get it to seal with going back to these fittings enough that I could use it. It just kept leaking. So I ended up just putting the stock one back in. And didn't have a problem with the cooling part. It was more of, I just didn't want to run it because of the, there's likely mud in the oil cooler section. But yeah, so my original, I think in some of the original videos, I had these lines kind of coming, you know, through here. I think I had this line kind of running, and then this would go and loop back into there, something along those lines. But yeah, let's get back out. And then the only other thing is when I did the oil cooler routing, I did kind of file a tiny section here just to give me a little bit more clearance. I don't think that was necessarily needed, but I just wanted to give it a little bit more clearance where those AN lines come down, just in case there was any like shifting or like a bushing went out and this kind of maybe moved a little bit. But rather than deal with possible issue with that, I decided to kind of give me just a tad bit more clearance. I mean, it's a pretty good amount. I mean, there's probably a good 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch from the line to this, so I don't think we would ever hit, but just to make sure, that's what I did. And yeah, I think that kind of covers everything. I did have to do a little bit of wiring. So when I pulled the heads, one of the grounds, so I don't know if I really went into this harness, but there's actually a ground on each cylinder head on the back side. So when I pulled the cylinder heads, the one on this side, actually the terminal broke. So I ended up having to rewire a new terminal in, so that kind of took a little bit, mainly because trying to climb up on here and build a terminal in an engine compartment while you're supporting yourself up on top of here was not exactly fun. But I ended up getting that redone. So there's a new terminal on this side. The one on this side was fine. So you have your two grounds there. I think I had covered before. This is the original alternator line from the V6. It fits the alternator and basically runs there. I have it kind of routed almost similar to the V6. The vacuum pump isn't on. It's kind of laying right there. But I did, you know, if you remember, I modified the V6 bracket to run the vacuum pump in a similar location bolted on the cylinder head. That's only achievable if you run the Camaro accessories. I think there's something here if you run the truck accessories, so you may have to build a bracket and run this, run the vacuum pump another way. But yeah, so running the Camaro accessories, I had plenty of room right here to bolt it to the cylinder head. So that's where it was mounted. It'll go back there. It's just there temporarily. I'm waiting for the water pump gaskets, which is kind of why I kind of stopped at this point. Those should be here by next weekend, so I can basically get this front back on. And then really the only thing left on the top here is to install the fuel lines from the pump to the rails. And I'm going to verify that I don't have a fuel leak, so I don't soak my insulator here. But once that's verified, the insulator will go back on, intake manifold can go on, and I can start plugging everything back in and get this front back on. Most of the trans stuff's on, the shift linkage is on, some of the bracketry that holds some of the fuel lines and all that's back in. Basically just the wiring and the starter. I got to put the starter in and just clean up some of the wiring. I did pull the starter cable. That is something I had to buy and make. The factory one could not be used because the starter's on this side on the V6, and on the V8 it's on that side. So I had a plastic sleeve around it at about the halfway point, and then it was heat wrapped since it goes by the passenger side exhaust manifold. It actually melted the little plastic piece in about a section right there. So it got pretty hot back there. And that plastic, it was just some cheap stuff I bought on Amazon. So I ended up pulling the whole starter cable out and redid all the heat wrap. And basically heat wrapped it from about right there. You can't really see it, but I heat wrapped it basically up until the point it gets away from the engine and goes to the battery. That's actually, if you look at the fuse block there, the starter is actually the back one that's by itself. That is the starter cable, if you ever want to know, for the Camaro, or for the Colorado V6. Same location, but it's still just got the plastic sleeve, at least part of the way, and then I kind of redid all that. So wanted to do a little bit of cleanup on some stuff that I kind of discovered, you know, when I took this thing apart. So that was one thing. Cleaning up some of the way the wires for the fuel rails are kind of attached, and cleaning that up to keep them down and within the insulator. They were kind of a little janky for my liking, because I want to try to run the cover. I wasn't running the cover before. If those remember, I didn't have the intake manifold cover on previously, but I want to put that back on. I still had it. Just so it looks nice and clean, because I will not have that hose going over the top anymore. But I'll cover that in a future video of the PCV setup. I finally got some fittings and stuff, so I'm going to basically rebuild my whole PCV setup. But I'll cover that in a future video. But I think that's pretty much it. I just kind of wanted to cover a few little things while I had it apart. From some questions that were asked. And yeah, if anybody's got any questions, you know, feel free to leave a comment or send a message, and I'll try to cover it in a video as best I can, especially if I have it accessible where I can just show you. And that should hopefully help if anybody is taking on a swap, which is cool. More swaps, the more fun these trucks become. But that's where we're at. Hopefully next weekend I'll get a good chunk done, because I'll be hopefully fully recovered from COVID. But not really much left to reinstall to at least get it started. I'll probably do a video once I get it started, just to kind of show the oil coming up the push rods again. And then once I kind of do that, then I'll likely do another video covering the diff stuff. So that'll be coming. So probably a video for the engine, video for the diff, and then hopefully the next video after that will be maybe just ripping around a little while we make sure the tune is still all good after all this work has been done. All right, I'll see you guys on the next one.